Welcome to another edition of Throwing Out Heavy Light. My name is Jamal Binding. I'm the chair of the board of Moving Omaha for Race Equity. And we have a special guest with us today, Jennifer Dang. I'm in the misprocess. She is one of the staff members who worked in a nonprofit in the community dealing with race and diversity. She also grew up in Nebraska and has a degree I'm not quite sure, but she has a degree at the university. We got to know her at a bit at the Omaha Public Schools school desegregation event that we held earlier last month, and it was a couple of months ago, but it was about school integration, busing, and she shared some very powerful stories and some of her experience growing up here in Omaha. And I thought, wow, I would love to have an opportunity to interview Jennifer, and she agreed to do that. Um, Also, she sees life a little bit different than some of the other groups in our society who deal with racial issues, and found that very unique as she shares some of that. And I wanted Jennifer to talk a little bit more about Asian American experience. And it's not often we have people of Asian extraction sharing about their diverse experience in the United States in public arenas. We also have that same challenge also now with Native Americans. So one of the things I like to do is emphasize the multiculturalism of our community and our country by having people from different points of view. So I've asked Jennifer to talk a little bit more about herself and some of these questions that many of us would like to ask, but not sure if they're appropriate. So Jennifer, really welcome to the program. We're happy to have you here today.
Thanks, Jamal. I'm happy to be here. So yeah, like you said, I have been working in the nonprofit area for like a little bit now. And then as far as my degrees, I do have a bachelor's in psychology, and I'm graduating this Friday, and I'm getting my master's in student affairs and higher education. So I would say that I have a lot of experience in like different areas and not just like I guess like in high school, which like I guess we will be talking about, but also through like higher education, my experience in that way, but also like meeting with other students and meeting with other like first generation students. So I'll be speaking from my experience, but also like sharing a little bit from what I've heard from others as well.
Good, good. Now, I talked to you a bit beforehand. Were you born in the United States or did you grow up here, or how did you arrive in Omaha per se?
Yeah, I was born in Omaha and I was raised in like Northwest Omaha-ish. And my mom came here from Vietnam like about 30 years ago because my grandpa was in the Vietnam War. And so we were able to come here. All my family came here, and not everyone lives in Omaha though. Some people live in other states like California. I have an uncle that lives in West Virginia. And I do have like other family members that still live in Vietnam, but it's no one that I'm super close to.
Good, good. By the way, I did some refugee work with Vietnamese, Cubans, people from Iran, Iraq, and so on in different places over the years. So I got a chance to meet people from other cultures, Laos, you name it. And each one of them have unique culture experiences they shared with me and different foods, of course. So it's fascinating to get to know the different people and meet them at the airport and help them resettle here in Omaha. One of the first questions I want to also ask you is, what was it like being an Asian American in our educational system, and particularly, where did you go to high school? That kind of whole experience. You talked a bit about that briefly, but give a little bit more insight into what it was like being an Asian at one of the local high schools in this city.
Sure. So I went to Elkhorn South High School, and I graduated in 2017. And I do have a couple notes over here, so don't mind me if I look over here. But so I would say that overall, like being in the educational system was interesting, which I'm not sure if that's the right word, but I'll start from like kindergarten and like kind of work my way up. And so I felt that going into it, it was a struggle not really knowing any English at all. And I know that other Asian students have experienced this where when they were like in elementary school, they were being judged by other students, they got bullied, and it was oftentimes for the way that they looked, or sometimes if we brought our own lunch, the other kids had something to say about it, like it smells weird. And but like now they're like eating our food though, and they're like really enjoying it. But as children, they don't understand the culture as much. And so because of that, a lot of Asian people, but me in particular, I felt like there was something wrong with me. I wasn't doing something right. And it made me feel like I didn't want to be Asian anymore. And I wanted to look like white people, and I wanted to be like them. And I didn't want to speak Vietnamese anymore. And so I didn't really like my culture when I was younger. And so as I'm getting older and I'm learning more about it, I'm embracing it more. And so, sticking with education though, um, I was in OPS for a handful of years, but it wasn't until eighth grade that I started going to Elkhorn, and a that was an interesting experience going from OPS to Elkhorn. It was a culture shock for me because I remember in eighth grade on my first day of school, I'm like, dang, there's like nobody here that looks like me. Everybody's white. I felt scared. I felt nervous because it's just hard to be in a place where I stand out so much and not necessarily in like the best way because they didn't really know how to interact with Asian students. And so, like a lot of the times they would say microaggressions, which I'll touch on later. And there was a lot of expectations of how Asian students should be based off of stereotypes. And so there's this idea of the model minority, and it's for Asian people. And, the expectation for us is that we excel in education. And so really good at the typical subjects like math and science. And we also like play an instrument like the violin or the piano. And so, for me personally, I like didn't play any instruments and I'm not good at math and science. And so at Elkhorn South, a lot of the students are really smart because, they have the funding to have really great teachers there. And then they also have funding, or not just funding, but also like their parents have the money to put them in like ACT prep courses. And then that's like a whole thing with like in Elkhorn in general, like starting from K through 12, there's just so much funding. So they really prepare you to go to college. And so I was one of those people that didn't score well on the ACT. I was one of the very few students that were low income at my school. And so when I received the Buffett scholarship to go to college, the students kind of felt some type of way because nobody else was getting like full tuition for college and they had to pay for like, but their parents were paying for it and they got to go out of state. But for me, I was staying in state and that's not particularly what I wanted. But, like since my mom, she's a single mom and low income, the Buffett scholarship was a really great opportunity for me. And so then when I left Elkhorn South and I went to UNO, that then was also another culture shock for me because I had been friends with so many white people, because that's all I had around.
Mhm.
And don't get me wrong, like I always wish that I went to a different high school. Like I really wish I went to Central in particular because it was more diverse there. And so, anyways, I went to UNO and I was, I had the Buffett scholarship, so I was in the Thompson Learning Community, and that's probably the reason why I really enjoyed undergrad because I met so many people that understood or like had similar experiences as I did. And then, I also had students that looked like me. And
Mhm.
so that was really nice to meet other students that just get it. And like I didn't have to explain so many things to them, like, oh, like y'all experienced that too. And so I'm like, hey, like I'm not the only one. And I'm like, so this is what I went through in high school. And like some of them came from like smaller towns in Nebraska. And so they're like, yeah, I was like the only like Hispanic person like in that area. And so, I got to meet a lot of different people that were similar but different from me. So I really enjoyed that.
Mhm.
And I felt like my experience with more diverse communities in college has really shaped who I am today and is the reason why I'm like so passionate about social justice related things.
Good. Backtrack a little bit. I didn't ask you, and I guess it hit me when you were out at your West Omaha high school and so on. Were there other African Americans or Hispanics there, or was it just you as because you alluded to being the only one in your class who's of Asian extraction? Was there other racial groups at the institutions when you were going through high school and elementary school?
As far as elementary school, yes, like as we know now, in OPS, white people are the minority now.
Right.
And so, I saw a lot of people that look like me and like a lot of other racial groups as well. But then when I went to high school, there were a few others. Like there, I could probably count on like one, maybe two hands, the amount of Black people that were there,
Oh,
the
wow.
amount of Asian people that were there. There weren't too many, and the people that were there, they were trying to whitewash or they were tokenizing, with the typical stereotypes of like, oh, like Black people are good at sports, and so they're really trying to like be friends with these Black people that are like good at sports. And so, they have their own experience. But like, of course, with me, like I knew of like two, maybe three other Asians in my
And
specific
did
class.
you actually talk to them and engage with them, or was you guys stand off from each other?
I will say that like I did engage with some of them, but like in high school, students are often like pretty cliquey. And so I like hung out in my own group and they hung out in their own
Got
group,
you.
and we didn't necessarily have like the same interests or
The kind of
anything.
unity of Asians or African Americans or people of color back then. One of the things that you shared, and I found it very powerful at that conference, you talked about a racial incident of discrimination that you experienced in school, and you wanted to report it to someone, but you didn't have anybody to report it, so you kept it to yourself. And I found that very intriguing for someone to be in a situation where you didn't have a person in leadership who's like in charge of diversity or who's very sensitive as a counselor. You go and tell about a racial incident you dealt with. But one quick question. Did you have a lot of microaggression, even though we're going down a little bit hard, as a student in high school, or did you see some of that throughout your whole life here at Omaha?
I saw it throughout my whole life, and even as an adult now, I still experience it. And although people usually mean well, depending on like how they're going about it, I've become pretty callous to it. Like I'm kind of used to people just like asking me where I'm from, but like where I'm really from, assuming that I'm not from the US because of the way I look. I'm like, or telling me that I speak really great English. I'm like, I sure hope so because like I was born in the US and like, I've been speaking English for like such a long time. And like
That's
English
cool.
is my second language though. Like I grew up like speaking a lot of Vietnamese, but I remember like my mom put me into preschool and I couldn't even like ask the teacher like where's the bathroom or like can that I had to go to the bathroom.
Right,
And so yeah, but like the only thing is that like I don't really know how to like read or write much in Vietnamese though because there was never really a reason for me to do that. And
right.
so on the same, along the same lines of language, there were oftentimes like students that would like say like make random noises or try to like say random things and be like, did I say something in Vietnamese? I'm like, no. You're just like saying gibberish and you did not say anything in Vietnamese at all. And so that was like a microaggression too, that people were doing, like just making random noises, but also like giving me nicknames that I didn't like say
You,
was
I mean, when
okay.
you say nicknames, are kind of like derogatory racial nicknames, or just something that in general that people do to other people in general? Help me with that one.
Well, there were some nicknames that I noticed that a lot of other Asian people were given. Like my cousin and I were called Ling Ling. And like so many people were called that. I'm like, why am I being called that? Well, okay. And then there were like racial slurs that they would call me too. But for me, I like didn't feel comfortable speaking up because I was a minority there and I didn't know if there would be any retaliation. I didn't know if anybody else would like stick up for me. And so I didn't really feel comfortable saying anything. There was no form of, from what I know, like diversity training for the teachers. If they did have it, I felt like it didn't really show much and they never really talked about like the issues with race at all because even in like sociology classes or like history classes they kind of just skim over like
Are you
Asian
talking
people.
about the high school or the university level? Which way are you talking? Or both?
I would say high school. With the
Okay.
university level, they have more specific classes and majors and minors. And so, yeah, like in high school, I experienced a lot of, like microaggressions for the most part. And there were some people too that would say really hateful things to me.
And you never
And
reported any of this.
no, I never reported any of it. And I never really spoke up about it either, ever, like to anyone.
So help me
And
here real quickly. Would you say it was like more than once, like 10 times or 100 times? I mean, I'm surprised as you're sharing this. is that loaded racist or incident in these Western schools? I've never really been in any of them per se, but you say in your career in school you had it a lot of times in, or is it once a month or once a year you experience? What is it like? How many times are we talking? Would you say?
If we're talking like K through 12, uh, it's a lot.
It was a
Like,
lot. It's something that the institution should have addressed by their environment and their racism and
yes.
microaggression behavior and just insensitivity to other visitors or cultures who come to our community. Okay, got you.
Exactly. And I feel like the younger generations these days they do like know more than I did. And even though I'm Gen Z, I felt like the elder Gen Zs like me, like we didn't get to learn like a ton about race. And I will say that like I had my own opinions though. Like my mom would like say things about like different racial groups, be like, Mom, like like you shouldn't be saying that. And nobody taught me that though. Like I could have learned from my mom, like because like she had racist things that she was saying as well.
Hmm.
And but like I didn't identify with them like ever though. And so, no, like I never said anything about them. I never stood up for myself. But it wasn't until I got to college that I would start saying things to
Hmm.
people about it. I felt more comfortable speaking up for myself, probably because there were others that looked like me or had similar experiences.
Right,
Also, like those people aren't usually saying microaggressions to me,
right.
and they have like a little bit of a better understanding. And I will say that like in college, we learn a little bit more like in sociology classes than say in sociology classes in middle school or high school. And like even in 2020, I think that's when I really started speaking out more with like everything that was happening. I felt like I needed to say something and I was very outspoken. And like especially on social media, I was not afraid to
So you
like
would
say
cover a lot.
whatever I
But
wanted.
let me hesitate here for a second and ask you. I notice you use the term microaggression, and some of us use the word racism. Can you define what microaggression is? Because I think it's a new term, a lexicon for those who are into race diversity issues, and DEI is a new word for some people. But what do you mean when you use the word microaggression? Give me examples of that.
Sure. So microaggressions could be considered as the everyday like jabs, jokes, slurs, or insults, slights that someone might say to you, whether it's intentional or not intentional. And I think it's kind of misleading to call it a microaggression because it's not really micro because over time it does hurt and become really harmful to the person that is experiencing the microaggression. So in the workshops that I have done, people ask about this, and an example to understand microaggressions is through death by 1,000 paper cuts. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Right, I have.
Yeah, but for those who haven't, if I get one paper cut, it like might not hurt at all, might sting a little bit. But if I got 1,000 paper cuts, it would hurt a lot. And so those micro things, those small,
Got you.
slights and
They
snubs that
build
people are
up.
saying to me, it'll build up over time. And so, like I said, like asking me where I'm from, but like where am I really from? Like that's a microaggression. Or like assuming that I'm good at math, that's their bias showing too. And like that all goes together too with like people have their own bias. And so, they are saying microaggressions because they have an idea of like what they
Got
think or
you.
what they know about us.
Gotcha. You know, the reason you say that, I had a colleague once who told me something like every time you raise issues, you always mention race. I said, well, that's what I experienced at this racist institution. And so, again, you're white, you're the dominant person group, and you got everything laid out for you. You don't have to deal with half the stuff that I do. And again, if I reported every racial incident, I'd be full time dealing with this racist institution, like working in Douglas County government or dealing with people in the OPS or every place I've worked, I've had to be in the kind of the person to speak out for that. I will switch up and ask you just a little bit different question. From your experience, and again, you and I have not really talked about this. What is your relationship as an Asian to those other racial groups, let's say African Americans, Latinos, or Native Americans? Because I really don't know if there's much of a relationship or see that a lot in our community here. Maybe in other cities and other places, but I don't see a lot of that. So my question is, what has been your experience working with other racial groups, and how have you been accepted by those other groups?
I feel like for the most part, I have been accepted by other groups. I think it depends on the space that I'm entering too. For me personally, I'm very accepting of other groups, but I wonder sometimes, like I've had this conversation a lot this year of like, am I like since I'm part of the model minority, like, am I not going through enough oppression to be like saying something? And someone gave me perspective, like, no, like we shouldn't be comparing like our oppression. So like you're going through your experience, and just because you're not black doesn't mean that, like you're not experiencing certain things. Like if I were to go to a small town in Nebraska, like I'd be scared. And
Mm,
so that in itself, like that my identity is like something that I don't feel is accepted by like white people per se. But when we're speaking about like marginalized groups, and like specifically race,
hmm
I don't know, sometimes I don't always feel like I fit in because when I go into these spaces, I'm usually the only Asian person there. And I think that is like a different story, a different topic too, as to why I'm often the only Asian person when that like comes to social justice related things, or I often only see myself doing like DEI work. And so I think that I'm trying to speak up more because people often see us as people, especially Asian women, they see us as someone who is submissive and just like follows all of the rules, doesn't like stand up for themselves, and that we're not as likely to be CEOs of a company because
hmm
we just don't have like those leadership qualities. And so I think it's hard. I accept everybody into my life, but I don't, I suppose like I somewhat feel accepted, but I sometimes feel like I stand out. So
Got
then I'm needing people to like include me more, and perhaps I want people to put that seat at the table for me, but I know that I should just be pulling up to the table and like, announcing myself there. So it's a hard relationship.
Gotcha. One of the things that many of us in the United States who've experienced this, and sometimes when we grew up where we're not taught about Asian culture, and someone will talk about the different Asian groups. Can you talk a little bit more about? I know we got the Vietnamese, Korean, we got Cambodians, we got Laotians, we got Indonesia, we got Indians from India, and so on. And some of people will categorize all certain Asians together, and if some of us, it can be problematic when you're talking about people from Pakistan and India being the same as Asians who's from China or Vietnam. So talk to me a little bit about the major differences, and do you see yourself as part of a monolithic Asian group in this society?
I would say that overall, I do identify as part of the monolithic group, part of the AAPI community, so Asian American Pacific Islander. I would say that overall I would identify as that, but I think that there is like a lot of separation and segregation within the AAPI community. And so oftentimes when people think about Asians, they think about like East Asia, so China, Japan, and Korea. And then now they're thinking more about Southeast Asia as well. So, as you mentioned, Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand, Cambodia, all those. Now, I feel that people don't talk much about the other Asian countries as well, or areas, I guess. So, like South Asia, sometimes people forget about Indian people. And, I can't speak on their experience and like, their how they feel about their Asianness
Hmm
because they're often forgotten about. And then, like Central Asia too, which sometimes others might consider as the Middle East. So, like Kazakhstan or Iran or even Afghanistan, that technically is Asian, but now I like separated it and called it the Middle East.
Right.
And then, yeah, also like we forget about the Pacific Islanders, part of the AAPI, which also includes Hawaii, Guam, Samoa. So there's just like so many different groups. And I will say that like when I talk about myself, I tend to specify that I'm Southeast Asian and I'm Vietnamese, but overall like part of the
So
AAPI
you know
community.
what's interesting? You just got to mention like the folks who live in like Hawaii and so on. That's a different kind of it connotes a different mindset. Hawaiians, I treat them almost like you do. I don't know. Would it be like native as Aleuts or Eskimos like that? So you see them as part of the Asian community too, the indigenous Hawaiians. I didn't know that.
Yes, I would consider them as a part of our community. I think that in Hawaii, there's a lot of Asian influence. And, like, I wonder people who are Hawaiian, like, I think they're different. Some people might identify as Asian, some people might not, but they technically would be considered part of a Pacific Islander.
Okay, got you.
And yeah, like they share a lot of cultural similarities with people in the Philippines too,
Okay, got
and
you.
have like their own traditions. And even though they're part of the United States, I have noticed that there is a lot of like separation there with like the mainland as being like the US, but then the island
Right, right,
countries.
right.
And so yes, it is a part of the PI when it comes to AAPI.
Got you. Can you cite examples of specific incident where you directly experienced racism or prejudice from a dominant group? In other words, can you cite and name something that happened to you recently or UNO or elsewhere that you articulate or fit remember that was very potent or painful or something like that? Can you remember those things well?
Yeah, there's a couple things that I do remember well. I will say that most of it happened in like high school. People were just really ignorant at my high school, and I was seeking validation from the white people because like, they're the dominant group, and so I just want to feel accepted. But there was somebody there that had called me a commie and like a communist because Vietnam is still a communist country. And so, like, they thinking about the type of things we learn in high school, like AP or like US history or like world history. They're learning all these things about communism. And so, yeah, they felt the need to give me that nickname for whatever reason.
So they
So
would say
at the
that in
time,
public in front of other students. They would call you a communist just like that.
yeah, they would. It'd be like multiple kids, and they thought it was super funny too.
Wow.
And so I would allow them to call me that because when I look back at it, I was simply looking for validation and acceptance. And even me during that time, like I thought it was funny. And like I just allowed it to happen. But now that I'm older, I'm like, I should not have allowed that. I should have said something. And so that's like a name that I've been called that I found really offensive, that always sticks with me. And there's like a couple things that they say. I look back and I'm like, like, oh, that's a good one. But then there was a time where someone came up to me and they just straight up said, I don't like Asian people. Like, I don't like you because I don't like
So
Asian
you say
people.
Elkhorn South?
Yeah, Elkhorn South.
Wow. I mean, the reason I'm blown away by it is because most of those functionaries, Karens and Beckys and white teachers studied at UNO or UNL, and you think they would have picked that in their multicultural class, but I know UNO got a couple of Beckys and Karens teaching those classes who have never been to North and South Omaha, who have no Black, Latino, Asian, Native American friends or associates. So they read the stuff in the textbook. And I even at the workshop was at, there was a counselor there from one of the West Omaha schools said she's had to confront some people and sometimes she's kept her mouth shut. So I was impressed at her telling how the climate is in those places. So we wonder why sometimes white people transfer out of those racist and sexist and homophobic institutions because they can be very mean spirited and those administrators they just look the other way like they're Trumpites or John Birchers or supporters of the Confederacy and some of them the women are obviously members of the Daughter of Confederacy. So but yeah, hearing you say this is like, did that happen in our time period, or did it happen in the 1930s or the 40s?
hmm Yeah, I mean, it's happening as we speak. Like, people are still feeling some type of way. Like, we see like people being really bold now that, like we have somebody that is in a position of power that's finally saying the things that they're feeling. And, like people say things about immigrants all the time. And like, although I'm personally not an immigrant, I come from a family of immigrants. And so, no, like this is happening all the time. Like I said, I was in high school from 2013 to 2017, and it was like constant all the time. Like, even a girl I was really good friends with, she told me, oh, Jenny, I don't even see you as an Asian. I just see
And
you as
this
a
is your
white girl.
friend. I assume she's a white girl, right? Young white girl.
Yep.
And she's one
hmm
of your best friends, and she says that, I told somebody once, and they found it amazing. It says, every white person I ever met in my life, no matter how close I am, I see them do something, I've done something racist. And again, it's almost like I say it's genetic. And again, people look at you flippant when you say that, but look at how our system is. And so you grow up in an environment where there's a lot of smoke, you can't help but get smoke on you. And unless you're pushing back against it, you're part of that same Trumpite negativity. And again, if people are logical and fair and just decent, why would you vote for somebody who's so mean-spirited about people from other places or who look different than him or her? So there's a lot of those closet racists and Klan members who work in local government. Douglas County, I saw a lot of them there. They didn't need the sheet on, but they had all the behaviors of that. City government, we got that. And you can also look the lack of people of color working those jobs. They give their jobs to their friends. But anyway, let me stop there. But go back to your stories. Each one of these stories, did they impact you even today, you think? Or is it something you just roll off your back? How did you handle that?
Well, during that time, like I said, I was just really wanting acceptance. And there's a lot of people that experience whitewashing or people attempting to whitewash you. And that statement in itself, like seeing me as only a white girl, is just, it is whitewashing me because she's choosing not to see that, like, I'm different and I look different. And then I have different traditions. I have a different culture. I have culture, And so she's choosing not to see that. And I don't know, like just other comments like calling me like the golden Oreo, like I'm yellow on the outside, but like white on the inside. Like that's just crazy to say.
So they actually say,
And
people actually in public say to you, Golden Oreo?
people really are bold and say those things. And I would say that like now I've chosen to, like just get through it and like move on with my life because I'm like, people are gonna say these things. That's just how they are. And at this point in my life, I can't do anything about the past. But all I know is if anyone's saying that to me now, I will say something.
You'll push
And that's
back.
yeah, I will of course push back now. Like I said, very opinionated. I'm like on social media, I'm not afraid to share my opinion. I will say like in 2020, there was probably a better way to share my opinion, but now I'm better at it just because, I'm a professional, I guess, and I have jobs that are on the line. And so, yes, like no matter what, I will say something. And even if it's not directed at me and it's about someone else, that's like part of being an ally is that you're standing up for someone when they're not even there.
Right. Now, as you mentioned, I was remembering I was teaching I was teaching multicultural counseling at Metro. They introduced the course and hired me to teach it because they didn't have anybody who had the qualifications and the skill set that I had. So it was one of the first courses I taught after I graduated, got all my degrees and so on and experience. But one thing that come to mind is they had a course called Human Relations, and they had a chapter on human relations and race or diversity. And do you know those clowns who wrote the book? I assume it came out of Texas. They never mentioned the word prejudice or racism once. And I complained to the administration, nothing ever happened, I'm sure, because they kept using the same book. I'm like, why would you adopt a book that has this chapter on racial issues and basically whitewash, talk about racism, prejudice, bias. I mean, I had to go out of my way to teach that to many of these naive students who didn't know it. So I know sometimes these institutions being white supremacist hegemony of growing into that mentality don't help prepare some of the students as well as the faculty and staff to deal with some of the students who come in their door. And so, I'm embarrassed somewhat that here we are in Omaha, Nebraska, which is one third of the city, one third people of color. Our systems don't include people who have different racial and cultural experience on the level they should. And so it's painful that you had to go through that. I know we only got so much time, but I want to ask you a different kind of question for you and your experiences, what you know today, Jennifer, versus what you know as a younger person, why would you say anti-racism and race equity work is so important for us to deal with or have in our systems and institutions? From your experience that you've somewhat shared today.
Sure. I think that there's definitely a lot of racial and pay equity that needs to be happening in the workplace. And so, that work is important for me and even age too, because like there's a lot of intersectionality that happens here. And so, like with me being a Asian woman, there's different experiences that, like my experience, like race racial inequity or inequality at work and not getting paid more, especially because I'm young as well and might be seen as like not as experienced. So I think that it's important to do this work so then we're getting the same opportunities and the same or the adequate resources. And some people would say that, well, like you're getting too much, like why do you need to get all these things? And like not all equality is equal, as Kimberly Crenshaw has said. And I really believe that because oftentimes people that might have more privilege, they feel like us getting more resources is taking away from them when it's simply not true. And like providing other opportunities for marginalized communities is trying to support them so then we can be like on the same level. We can both succeed. But people don't always see it that way though. And so that's why I feel like this work is important. So then people have the same opportunities to be able to succeed.
Mhm. By the way, Humanities Nebraska this year brought Amy Tran, I guess a famous writer who's Asian, to speak at their annual thing, and she was fascinating. I've seen her books over the years, but I have not read it. But to have her tell her stories about her mother, she's a very blunt person. She's a very has different skill sets. She's also a painter and into nature, but she's one of the best speakers I've heard talk about the Asian experience. And oftentimes we don't read books written by Asian Americans or how Hawaii was appropriated or taken from the Hawaiians, and again, what happened in part of the Philippines or Vietnam and so on. So now we're starting to see some more of those Asian voices. But I think some of us, if we don't have an opportunity, Jennifer, to meet people like you or elsewhere, we have to get some of that education on our own through the literature of those people who are great writers or movie stars who can tell about some of their experience. Because again, she started talking, it was just fascinating because she had this universal experience that I think spoke to many people who come from other countries and also have mothers and fathers who are very blunt, especially as they get older. But she was just a marvelous speaker, and I was just impressed with Humanities Nebraska brought somebody who's that famous, but also someone who has a sense of humility and so on. But I always love to see them have people like you and other local people do much more to help us in Nebraska learn about the Asian experience. One other thing I was going to come back to, and I want to backtrack a little bit. Do you have books or role models or things as Asians? Like we hear about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Severo Chavez and so on, those and maybe some Native people, but we oftentimes don't hear about the Asian. And again, we know that Asians experience a lot of hardship during the railroads and settling and coming here as indentured type servants, Chinese and so on. Are there books or role models in the Asian experience that we should all know that oftentimes is not taught in our educational experience? And again, you being of Vietnamese extraction, does that go back to your respective homeland of your parents, or is that something we should just know across the board of all Asian cultures?
As far as like books, I suppose, I don't read a ton of books by, like people from the AAPI community. So like also, like that's part of the issue too. It's because, like we don't hear much about it. And then, we have to find like more research. And then like there's a dedicated month for us, which is in May. And so during that time, like we can learn all these things. And so I know that there are tons of books out there. There's one about like H Mart, which is about it's like an Asian market basically, and they have that in like different areas of the country. And there's that, and it talks about like people's experiences growing up as an Asian person. I think there are tons of books about that, but then there are also like more, I guess, like educational books, and there's some about like the Japanese internment camps,
Gotcha.
and like people often forget about that too, that like that happened as
In the
well.
United States, right? World War II.
Exactly. And then why we have so like why there is such a large population, like Asian population in California.
Yeah, by the way, I went to San Francisco years ago when I was doing service learning part-time at Methodist College. And I went into the airport, and being from Nebraska, never been to California per se. I'm getting off the airplane, and I see these Asians directing the plane and Asians. I'm like, what is this? I mean, it's almost like when I went there in Los Angeles and I saw the Latinos or Mexican Americans or whatever. And I was like, wow, I've never seen somebody because I'm from Nebraska where we're such a minority. And then when I go to the South and I see black people there in big numbers, like, what's this? And I remember I was driving with my sister from Texas, Houston to Texarkana. As we was driving, I saw some black people in a rural area on like a motor scooter or something. And I said to my sisters who was driving, what are they doing out here? She said, live out here. This is nothing but rural country. She said, where you been? I said, oh, from Omaha, you know that. But it was fascinating to see different racial groups in not only San Francisco, Los Angeles, and the majority in many areas. And it was just fascinating to see that being from Nebraska, where oftentimes, like 12% of the population or whatever those population numbers we know of is very small. Um, just another question to ask you is, what cultural issues can community members participate in to give them a better understanding of the Asian culture in the city? And the reason I ask that, Jennifer, is there are some of us who believe it's not my responsibility to educate you about my culture and that you need to read the book or come halfway with me, but don't come and expect to get free education. And I'm doing it tuition free. I'm going to be your gateway to understanding my culture. So my question is, if someone wanted to self-educate themselves or be much more familiar with the culture experience of Asian Americans or Asians in general, what are some suggestions or things that you would say to give us a better sense of Asians in our community?
hmm It's funny that you bring up responsibility because when I was writing down my own notes, I was saying that it's their responsibility to do the research. And so, like there's events around town that happen. Although I will say there's not a ton of events all the time. Like even me, like I'm searching for them and there's barely ever any events that are happening. Unless I'm not searching hard enough. And I will say that there are certain times of the year where there are more events. And
Mhm.
so, for example, like Chinese slash Vietnamese New Year happens like around the same time each year. So, like end of January, early February. And I know that MCC always has events at the
When
South
you say
Campus.
MCC, you talk about Metro Community College? Okay.
Yep, exactly. So they have Vietnamese New Year in particular. They're every single year, and it's always on their website, so you can like check it. And it's like I said, it's free, and you can like try the food there. And then there's like dragon dances. Like there's so many things that you can learn there, and they're. Like oftentimes, like I took my white friend there one time. She's like, "Wow, like I never seen this. Like I've never eaten this before." And it's like foods that like might smell weird to some people, like fish sauce. Like people are like, like I don't know about that. And so I think it'd be a good time to be around like other Asian people too.
Hmm.
And also just like see things that you've never seen before. Because, it's really cool. It's really beautiful. And like, I love learning about it. But also, like, during AAPI month in particular, there are like a few more events. But since we are in Omaha, I feel like there aren't as many. And like I said, AAPI month happens in May. And I remember putting together like a list of like resources and events happening in May. And it was so difficult for me to find events in both like Omaha and Lincoln.
Hmm.
And, that it just made me wonder, like, why is that? Like, are there not as many Asians like coordinating these events?
Right.
Because I personally feel like Asians should be coordinating this event because it's so I don't feel like any other race should be putting on like AAPI specific events, especially during AAPI month.
Right.
That's just my opinion though. And
Right.
so then I wonder, like, is that a cultural thing for Asian people to not speak out as much? And so, like when have thought about that a lot this year actually. And, a lot of my goal is to uplift AAPI voices more.
Hmm.
And like, how can I do that? How can I encourage my counterparts to speak up more? And I think the issue is like, as like when we're younger, we're often told like don't talk back. And so even if you don't agree with something, like
You
don't
don't
be
even
disrespectful.
respond. You just keep it to yourself.
Keep it to yourself. Don't start any problems. Like, don't say anything.
Right.
And, there's also like the whole thing too. Like, maybe we're not like as oppressed because like we're the model minority. And so there's like things that's like, I don't want to speak out about my race because I don't have it as bad as like certain other
Right. As
people.
other groups.
And
I understand.
so that's like the thought there too, like that's just my assumption as to like why, like I don't know about like many Asian events that are like going on around town. But yes, I would say go to those events. Inclusive Communities also has an AAPI table talk that happens every year. It usually happens in May. I know IC does have one coming up in May, and it's going to I think the last one was about food, and then this upcoming one in May will be about the arts and, like learning about like how Asian people have contributed to the arts like throughout the world and specifically in the United States as well. And I think that's what we can do is just learning about the different contributions that we have had in the world, like whether that is art through like music and like murals or paintings, even
Hmm.
poetry and architecture, learning about all of those things, how we have contributed to that, and like so many other things. So then we can be more appreciative of the culture. And also just learning from others' experiences. And then after those experiences or encounters with Asian people, just making sure that you're sharing that with other people too. So then you're sharing the knowledge. And
Hmm.
so that oftentimes people will ask me like, how like do you like when people ask you about your culture? And like it feels kind of weird for me to be like, like tell me more about like your culture. And for me personally, at least, like I do like when people ask about it. I think it depends on how you go about it, though, because some people be like, "Oh, like, what's your ethnicity?" They're like, "I'm Vietnamese," and they'll be like, "Oh, I love pho," which is like, like a very common dish that people eat. And I'm
Right.
like, "What that got to do with me?"
Right. No, and as you mentioned, it brings two stories for me I want to share briefly. When I was working at Catholic Charities, I went to the Vietnamese New Year celebration. I think it was at the church downtown, almost Leavenworth, St. Peter's on. And I've never seen
Yep.
so many Vietnamese families there and people.
That's where all the Vietnamese people go to church.
Oh, it was. I even had a priest who was Vietnamese at one point when I was working there.
Yep.
But the food was excellent. The people were nice, and a lot of the folks, some of the folks I won't say a lot, but some of the folks I knew through me were settling as refugees when they came here to Omaha. So that's how I got invited. And then the other thing is I got invited to someone's house, Laotian, who I was kind of like the father kind of because I had to get the house and get the food, take them to the store and stuff because the mother came as a single parent with 4 kids and she didn't drive and didn't speak the language. So I was the lifeline to that family. And so I took that role very seriously where I had to do a lot with them and take them places. And they had a teenage daughter who ultimately helped a lot more. She spoke a little bit more English, but they became independent at some point and ended up moving, I think, to Sioux City, Iowa. But my point was I got immersed a little bit more so in the Asian community by doing that work. But one story that jump out is I got to know a Vietnamese couple through my resettlement, and we got to become friends. And again, when we even I think at some point we became such friends. They came to my house, and I might have went to their house. Obviously, when they reselling families and working with different families, you go invited. And I learned a long time ago when somebody offer you food, especially free food, you don't refuse it, and you don't want to be insensitive. But this particular woman, I mean, I'm not going to mention her name, but she made the most wonderful egg rolls. I mean, they were like perfect. I mean, like you don't, I can't describe it to you. They were so good, you might want to commit a felony. But one day she came by the office to check on one of her relatives she was trying to bring over, and she brought me 6 egg rolls. And it was right around lunchtime, and she knew my wife. She says, "Now, Ajima, I'm giving you these egg rolls. I have 3 for you and 3 for your wife." And it just so happened that day, I didn't have lunch, and I was starving Marvin. And I ate one and then ate another one. And the third one, I said, okay, I know I got to stop now because my wife needed to get the third one. But I couldn't help myself. And so I ate all 6 of them that day. That was my food. So we were in some place. I think they came to our house for some party or something. And she asked my wife about those wonderful egg rolls. And I looked at my wife like, oh. And so I got busted. But I'm telling you the story because I remember the cultural exchange and our relationship behind that. It was a powerful experience of meeting people and just the warmth of how they accepted you and how they were. And then all to the point where you get to a point where you really, and some people disagree with fraternizing with people you serve, but sometimes you meet people and their experiences are so powerful, you just want to get to know them better. But we're getting down to about the last 5 minutes or so on this program. And I want to also ask you at least 2 more questions. As you move forward in your career and your life and so on, do you think you might be doing a lot more volunteer work in this cultural bridging, or are you just going to be individualistic on that? Because I say that not to be negative, but there's some people who are very deep in their culture, they know it backwards and forward, and there's some people who are ambassadors where they're always trying to help other people. And again, not to put a good or bad on that, but where are you at in terms of your stage of where you at as a person, knowing all the experiences you have?
Yeah, I talked about how the culture of the US is so individualistic. I put that in my notes so, we're on the same page. I think for me personally, one of my goals is to work more with Asian people. And then, like, I want our voices to be heard more. And then, like, I just want us to speak out. And like I know it's really hard to do that because we're not used to doing that. And
Mm-hmm.
like sticking up for ourselves, like for me personally, like I've had to be more like assertive at work so I can be taken seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of like volunteering around town, I think that like I would be interested in that. And I feel that it's not just Asian people that should be doing this work. I think we
Mm-hmm.
should be doing this work collectively in the community because I find myself supporting other racial groups in the community, and I really want others to come together as well and learn more about the culture and then like help uplift our voices too. And people that should definitely be part of that is white people
Mm-hmm.
because they have like, the power and they also have like opportunities to like share our stories. And so if they really want to be an ally, they will do that and also stand up for us when we're not in the room with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so yes, as far as like my journey, we're still trying to figure that out. I'm young still, so trying to figure that out. But I would love to do more work with Asian people. I will say it's a little hard in Nebraska though, so I'm always thinking about leaving because, as we talked about, there's certain parts of the US where there are more Asian people. And so, as we know, California has like large population depending on where you're at. And I know like in Texas, there's a pretty large population of Asian people too. And so, me personally, like I love to be more around them. And then at the same time, I'm like, maybe I should like start it here because there's a ton of like all that work going on over there already. And so I
Mm-hmm.
might as well do it here. And
Right.
so trying to like figure out and like reach out to other Asian people, like, are y'all down to do this? Because it's true that like we are pretty individualistic, and I would say that like the Chinese community, like they're doing something else, like the Nebraska Chinese Association, they're doing their own thing. Also, the Karen community, they're doing their own thing. So I feel that we're really separated, and I would love to see more people from the AAPI community just come together because at the end of the day, I think that it's important to like embrace our differences, but also to maximize our similarities.
Mm-hmm. Got you. As you mentioned that, I was just sitting there thinking about the elected officials in Nebraska, and particularly in Omaha. And I remember growing up, Takechi Jewelries were here, and they were Japanese extraction. And in fact, one of the siblings, Julie, worked with me at Catholic Church. She's now late now, but they were very prominent and known. And I think her brother was elected as a city council person, probably the first Asian person to be on the city council in Omaha. And so they're well known. That he's no longer with us, I understand. And then the other person was a Laotian person, Hmong, I think. He went to a city council meeting and they had a vacancy in his district. I'm gonna say it's kind of like near Northwest Omaha. He made a powerful speech and they voted him in because they had the person before him was not there, had abdicated or whatever it was. So they needed to make a selection on those who applied. And he became a city council person in Omaha, even though Asians make up a small percentage of the population
Wow.
here. But it was fascinating that it happened. So it's interesting that we do have a history of elected officials in Omaha, but I think we got to do better of Asian extraction. I think we got to do a better job in some of those county positions and elsewhere. But again, it's fascinating. I may be wrong. He might have been to get you maybe county, but I'm thinking he was city, but I'm not sure. It could be one of those, but I know he's elected official. We're down to about 5 minutes, so and I wanted to give you a chance to. Are there any other closing comments or things that you would like to share, Jennifer, related to our conversation or things that you that you want to share with our viewing audience?
I think I had already kind of touched on it a little bit, but it's really important to remember that, like all Asian groups are really different but we're also similar, right? In many ways. And so it's important to remember that not all Asians are just like East Asian. Not all Asians are Southeast Asian. So we can't forget about the other Asian groups and remembering to learn about them too. For example, we have the Karen community, which the Karen community is actually the large, like in Nebraska and Omaha, Nebraska in particular, like they're the largest growing like Asian community right now, like in the US, like in Omaha, Nebraska.
Wow, like
And
the
so
Sudanese. Wow, the same way years ago.
yep. Exactly. And so I would like people to learn more about different areas of Asia and not focus so much on East Asia and Southeast Asia. Like I said, love them. And also, like, we need to show more respect and give other Asian countries acknowledgement too. And then lastly, like, for my people, like, I want to get together more. Like, I think it's important to, like, have our voices heard. And I just struggle with the fact that I don't see as many people that look like me out here. And so when we talk about diversity and like legislature or like city council, things like that, policymakers. Well, the reason, like, we want that to be more diverse and we want to include more Asian people, right? But then the Asian people need to put themselves out there,
Right.
though, in order for us to bring them on. And so, how can I, start working with other Asian people in the community to like uplift them and encourage them to invite them to like do more of that work?
Yeah.
So that's what I have to say.
We're good. Well, Jennifer Dang, I really appreciate you being here today. I've shared with somebody, this is one of my first interviews with Asian American or Asian on some of the things that we do with more. It's a pleasure to be able to do that, and hopefully get an opportunity to do more of that. The other little note I want to make is we also want to have people join us. We want to start kind of a book reading groups where we get people to learn about different racial groups. So we're going to have one in January, the 28th. The North Branch Library is going to deal with racism, the Sum of Us. That's a woman named, I think, Heather McGee is the author, and we're co-sponsoring that with Omaha Public Library because we're trying to push the library and public entities to bring more racial diversity within their operations as well as staff. So one of the things I throw out at you before we leave is that we really would like to maybe have a book discussion that could be universally help us understand the culture of Asian Americans or Asians in general, and again rotate that with different racial groups and ethnic groups as we start with this journey. But Jennifer, really appreciate you being here today. It's a pleasure. And one of the things I consider success of a program also if you make the host laugh uncontrollable. So you did that a few times, but thank you very much. And
Yes.
we hope that people learn from this wonderful experience and hopefully can have you back again to talk about some of your other endeavors that you work on to help bring our worlds together. So thank you very much again.
Well, thanks, Ajmal, for having me. I love sharing my experience. I don't ever get to do this, so I'm really happy that you brought me on.
It took good. Well, folks, we hope you've enjoyed this edition of Throwing Down Some Heavy Light. Catch us with us through our webpage, register for a few of endeavors. And also, if you ever want to catch up with some of our guests or folks, feel free to go through more omaha.org to help us bridge the gap and bring these worlds together, particularly in these trying times with some of the stuff that's going on the national level and, of course, the state level and so on. And so we need to be witness to history by challenging it and making our world better than we found it. So thank you. As we always end our program, may the force be with you. Baroko.